Hot on the heels of featuring this car and a build for it, which of course you can see here in Special Projects Pack 13 last week, I did a replica of the Spoon NSXR, a vehicle which, as I said in that replica tutorial, I'm really surprised actually that Polyphony never put in a Gran Turismo game already. It seems like a very strange vehicle to overlook, given how many NSXs we've had, and of course how much of a presence Spoon has almost always had in Gran Turismo, but for whatever reason they haven't done that. They focus more on the Integras and Civics. This one though is a weapon, and I wanted to talk about it again in GT7 because of course we skipped over this in GT Sport. It wasn't in that game. We last saw it in GT6. It was already a premium, and crucially it was already a ballistic missile around the track. In particular, for anything between, say, 500 and 600 points, I think it was if I recall correctly, this thing was borderline untouchable in this kind of JDM category. For mid-engine rear-wheel drive sports cars in particular, it was just insanely quick, and had this car been in GT Sport, it might have actually been the most OP version of it we've ever seen. And the reason why I say that is because even if you represented it in the exact same way as in 6 or now in 7, because that game featured a power-based ranking system rather than a point-based system, this thing would have wiped the floor with pretty much everything else, because aside from the price, nothing about the car is that crazy. And that's one of the reasons, of course, why many JDM cars tend to punch well above their weight, because of the regulations that they have, even though, of course, some cars kind of push the boundaries a bit there. The general area where stuff like Skylines, Evos, Subarus, RX-7s, NSXs all end up with doesn't tend to have as much leeway as many European or American cars, so they really have to extract the most possible ability they can out of the regulations that they have to work within. And obviously that applies here with the roughly 276 horsepower agreement that many of these JDM cars had, but even as far down as K cars with 660cc turbos and 63 horsepower, but still being phenomenally quick little machines like your Suzuki Altos and your Daihatsu Core Avanzatos, etc. This one though, in terms of power, is a little bit of a hike. It's still not crazy though. 290 horses is not insane at all. In terms of torque, obviously being a Honda, it's not the torquiest thing around, but the weight is pretty good also, 1270 kilos. Of course, the fact that it is an NSXR, in other words an NSX Type R, this of course being the 2002 in particular, so post the redesigned front end, it's already a brilliant car. It's already lighter, it's already faster, it's already super rare in real life as well, and speaking to its rarity, it's a hell of a lot more expensive in 7 than it was in 6. In fact, I didn't notice the last time it came around in the used dealer, but I think it was $500,000. At least that's what I've got written down on my spec sheet, but I did write this one down quite some time ago, so that could be out of date now. Likewise with the point level, when I noted this one down, it was 532 stock. I could see that changing by this point, but to highlight just how quick this thing is, the replica that I'm driving here, again from Special Projects, only has 320 horsepower, and it weighs not much more than 1,000 kilos. As you can see, it's still on sports tyres, albeit softs instead of hards, but even then, to even entertain being on the same kind of plateau as the supercars and hypercars in this event shows just how well above its weight this thing can punch. And of course, many of us know that a car like a Skyline or a Supra is going to do that. I feel like sometimes vehicles like the RX-7 or the NSX get not forgotten, but kind of passed over, if you will, for stuff like Supras and Skylines. And even though there's probably some merit to that, given how insanely OP those are, the NSX, when it comes to pure track ability, not straight line performance, but cornering in particular, I might actually argue that although the Skyline is a bit more forgiving because of the computers, because of the four-wheel drive, etc., the NSX might be the ultimate JDM car in that kind of upper echelon at least, for just its cornering and track day ability. And the fact that Senna was involved, it kind of makes sense. Being a mid-engine car, of course, it has more of a pure sports car approach. Even the RX-7 is not as completely focused on being a sports car as this is, and this is almost the closest to being like a supercar, really, within that group. And of course its price tag at the time being on par with the Porsche 911, it kind of indicated that Honda was marketing it that way to some degree as well. It's funny because there seems to be something about Japan where when they try and make a real top tier exotic, it very rarely goes well initially. The car is brilliant and people just don't buy it. The LFA, the NSX, the new NSX, it happened again. The one time that they seem to have really bucked that trend, being a rival for European cars but still doing well, seems to be the R35 GTR. This one though, well, of course being even more expensive, I would imagine was even less popular at the time in anywhere outside of Japan. These days I'm sure being 500,000 credits is somehow valid to real life. I haven't checked the used price of a Type R recently, but regardless of its price, it is an absolute weapon. And I'm so glad to be able to say that still in GT7 with revised physics, of course some newer vehicles which weren't there before, new tuning in terms of wide bodies and motor swaps available to many cars. The fact that this can not only still compete, but still beat many of those alternatives really goes to show how much A, respect Polyphony gives to the car, and B, it shows just how much of, well, a weapon this car is. The NSX is already very impressive, the Type R even more so, and this one was always my favourite version of the NSX in GT6 because it was just such a useful car, and it almost felt better, in my opinion at least, to drive than some of the racing versions did. I've of course spoken before about not being the biggest fan of NSX race cars in this series, but between this one in GT7 and of course much more recently having the return for the first time ever in premium form, the GT500 version of the older shape NSX, they're on a roll, as far as I'm concerned, in GT7 with fantastic Honda NSX representation. I personally believe, on a slight tangent, that the new NSX is going to become much more appreciated over time as well, because being undervalued and having prices that don't mirror what it should be, that can't last forever. I don't think it will necessarily go as extreme as an LFA, but it wouldn't surprise me if it ends up being worth a lot more than something like a GTR, which it kind of already is, but I think you know what I mean. But that's it for my thoughts on the NSX-R. I would love to hear your thoughts, and I definitely saw a lot of positivity from you folks saying that you love the handling on the NSX-R anyway, you love the build, but even just the base car. It's so good to work with, and like I said, punches well above its weight. But that's it for my thoughts on the NSX-R. Of course, I'll see you next time with more reviews, and for now, thanks for watching.